Hello and welcome to the Rainbow Circle, episode 118, I think. The lighting is very weird today. So I wanted to do a review of this book I did for a book club called Real Life by Brandon Taylor, because partly on the last episode, as my millions and millions of devoted fans remember, of course, on the last episode I talked about the myth of relatability, which I think is one of the obstacles in really understanding what makes things good or bad. So I do want to use Real Life by Brandon Taylor as an example of where I think that confusion comes down, or where that becomes an obstacle to really understanding how stories work. But if you remember, as my millions and millions of devoted fans remember from last episode, the whole idea I was talking about there, and the practical application of the idea, is to shift what we usually talk about. Most of the writing advice we usually talk about, shift it in terms from terms of good or bad to easy or hard. So a lot of what we talk about when we are, I almost slipped into a Raymond Carverism. I hate that phrase. What we talk about when we talk about, I really hate that phrase. I really hate everything about Raymond Carver. But that actually relates directly to what I'm talking about today. But I want to shift what we normally talk about as being good or bad. This is how you write a good story, quote unquote. This is what's bad in a story. I would rather shift that to easy and hard, because if you reframe it and you say, this makes the goal of this story easier. And I would say the goal of the story is empathetic emotional experience, just regardless of any other goal. There could be thousands of different goals, but the main goal is empathetic emotional experience. So this particular aspect of the story is not working because you're using this particular element that makes emotional engagement harder. And that can apply to relatability. Move, please. Move, please. And I think especially lately, there's, I think, a lot of mischaracterization, especially of demographic relatability. I must be able to relate to this person because we share this demographic similarity, which is directly counterproductive. I mean, a lot of the discourse about this kind of thing gets really simplified into either or terms. So I'm not saying it's good. I would argue in favor of diversity of writers and in favor of diversity of perspectives and having this wide variety of perspectives. I would categorize those as really two different things. One of them is saying that we should have a wide variety of different writers from different perspectives, different backgrounds, different demographies, absolutely 100%. But then to say, I enjoy this particular piece, it is a good piece because I relate to it on this level. The logical implications, on a demographic level, the logical implications of that can be directly counterproductive to having more diversity of voices in my opinion. So I wanted to make sure to add that. That was what I talked about in the previous episode. But I did want to point out I DNF'd. I mean, so I can't really speak with authority on the Brandon Taylor book because I did not finish it because I did not enjoy it at all. But I was doing it for a book club. And one of the points that came up, I do book clubs so that I finish things. I almost never finish books. I have this impossibly, I wouldn't say high standard, but I mean this idiosyncratic standard where I dislike most books that I read. Doesn't mean I have better taste. It just means my very particular taste. I dislike most books that I read, and I DNF most books that I read. But this one in particular, I just didn't really like anything about it. But someone in the book club brought up the other person, other people in the book club liked it, and therefore I would never say it's a bad book. I mean, that's one of the problems with the reviews, is to say, conflate the idea I didn't like this with it is bad. Those are not the same thing. Partially that is one of the logical problems with the workshop system is conflating I did not like this with this was bad. That is not the same thing at all. Just the fact it was a 3-person book club. The other 2 people liked the book. Entirely valid positions, entirely valid opinions. But I would say one of the other people in the book club, he identified, it's real life is about African American who is gay and his experience in college. He comes from the South, he goes to the North. And so the other member of the book club, white, straight, male, said, I did, because I didn't go through the same experiences, I did not relate to what he's going through. So I didn't connect with what he's going through because I have this demographic difference. And so entirely valid to say I like this book and I didn't like this book. We don't have to come to the same conclusions about a book. However, I would question the notion that the reason why you don't feel something for a character is because they have a demographic difference. This is one of the reasons why I would replace good and bad with easy and hard. It could be valid to say I had a harder time relating to this person because I didn't go through the same experiences. That's entirely valid. But I would argue a good writer can do that regardless. Good writer is able to make a really compelling, emotionally intense experience, an empathetic experience of a character, just regardless. I mean, that's how imagination works. If I was only able to feel emotionally for a character who was the same as I am, I would have an extremely limited range of emotional experiences when I read a book. And I do have an idiosyncratic limited taste in things that I really truly enjoy. It has nothing to do with my own personal experiences. I've never really read a book that has my same personal experiences, and nor would I really want to necessarily. So limiting the capacity of my ability to enjoy something based on someone else having, being white male or straight or what have you. That's how it, that sort of concept of good and bad would significantly limit the diversity of voices for sure. So the book I thought of just as a counterpoint was, this is just the book that popped into my head. I mean, there's thousands, there are thousands of books that can refute that basic premise. So if you think of the basic premise as being, I could not relate to this character in Brandon Taylor's book because I'm white and straight, I would say that's a false premise. And I would argue probably there are other issues for why you couldn't relate to the character. Just the book that popped in my head as a refutation of that basic claim was The Warrior Woman. I thought, well, I love The Warrior Woman. The Warrior Woman is a great book. It's about women in China and Chinese immigrants. It starts off, stop getting in my face. I don't remember the time frame exactly. It covers just a wide time frame. It was published in 1976. It starts off in 1924, I think. It covers lots and lots of different times. It goes way back to the Fa Mulan story. It covers a wide variety of time. I didn't have these experiences. Therefore, I am not a Chinese woman. I'm not an immigrant. If that premise had any sort of validity, don't eat my, oh Lord. Why are you chewing books? You're a bad cat. But what was it about? I don't have any experiences of any of the characters in Woman War, and I think one of the reasons that it popped into my head was Maxine Hong Kingston also wrote a book called Trip Master Monkey. I read that when I was in grad school. And Trip Master Monkey is about a character. I think he's 20, if I remember correctly. I should have brought that one in here. I think he's 20 or 18, 19, something like that. I was probably 23, 24 when I read it. And so I easily related to the character, just automatically based on that sort of demographic similarity. He was from an immigrant family in San Francisco. I don't know anything about San Francisco. I've been there once. I mean, I couldn't say geographically that I found it relatable. But just the idea that this text is good because I relate to it, and the reason I relate to it is because I have these similarities in my life. How do you really break that down piece by piece? How much of it? I mean, this is kind of the point I was making with the divorced dads. They were dads of two girls. I'm a divorced dad of one boy. Therefore, that should be an obstacle to my ability to relate to a divorced dad, right? Well, no, that's ridiculous. That that sort of particularity should factor into why I relate to a book. A book is a good book on so many different levels, on a subconscious level, on various other levels. And I would argue the reason number one why you like or dislike a book is irrational. But a great writer, and a great writer is entirely subjective. They can mean thousands of different things, but I would say a great writer that you connect with is able to, communicate that sort of emotional experience, just regardless. I mean, if you think of, I should have grabbed my italic cover, Cosmo Comics, a book like Cosmo Comics. Those are inhuman conceptual entities in that book. Very, very much an emotional experience that I connected to in Cosmo Comics, even though I don't even know what most of those entities were. They were just abstract concepts. So that as a factor is irrelevant. So and I've talked about this mechanism. If you're trying to figure out what is good or what is bad, you could do this on a personal level. You could do this, you can figure this out on a broader level for all of fiction or what have you, all of any particular art form. You can say, what is good personally to me? What is good universally in all cases? What is that middle ground? What is commonly good? It's just a three-part structure. I do it in interlocking triangles. But you could say, here are the three categories. So you could propose and say, this is a good piece because the characters are relatable to me. I've had this similar experience. Can you think of a good, this is how you test it. It's casuistry. It's a kind of casuistry. Can you test that against an example of a book where I haven't had the same life experiences, or there is a character who is demographically different from me? Did I enjoy that book? So I would say, Brandon Taylor, I enjoy it, or I did not enjoy it. The reason I did not enjoy it is because of these demographic differences. I would never say that. That would be a horrible thing to say. But that the inverse is what my book club interlocutor was essentially saying. So I could say, I could propose what makes a book good. I relate to it on this particular level. I can easily refute that. There are tons of examples of books where, luckily, beautifully, wonderfully, graciously, there are thousands of books that I enjoy, and I relate to, and I feel emotionally for, and I, connect with the characters, where the characters are demographically quite different from me. And that's the beauty of empathy. The beauty of empathy. It doesn't matter if I actually have had the same experiences. I can feel a deep connection. But I think there's a fallacy that one of the issues with Real Life, which is a terrible title. I hate that title. But anyway, I didn't really like anything about this book. One of the issues with the Real Life that kind of parallels, relates to really directly, is Bulverism, which is a fallacy. I spent long hours looking through lists of fallacies to find this particular fallacy to describe one of the most common logic problems that I saw in workshops. And I discovered it. It's called Bulverism. And I think Brandon Taylor's real life really demonstrates what I would say is everything wrong with the workshop. Most things that are wrong with the workshop. There are plenty of just really structural problems with the workshop system beyond just this one book as an example. I thought the prose was really bland. It was uninspired. I didn't really. I saw this New Yorker review that said it's a campus book of a different kind. I really did not notice anything original about it. I doubt I could really remember any details except it was about nematodes. There's somebody else in the book club who was a scientist who studied nematodes apparently, and she related to that directly. But that's the only thing I could really point to as even remotely different from 1,000 other stories and books that are very similar. The really, really bland prose, I think, is the kind of really, really bland prose that you get from the workshop system, where there's very anti-purple prose sort of sentiment. There's a very spare prose sentiment. Spare prose, I would say, I would personally consider really boring prose. But it's treated as this universal good for no real clear reason. And there's also the apositive strings. There's so many apositive strings, and that is an entirely. If you did a Mogon of that one, like a 3-part structure of that one, and you said, what is something that you just as an individual really hate, but nobody else probably will? What is something that is commonly bad? What is something that's universally bad? The one, just a pet peeve, just a pure pet peeve of mine is apositive strings, but it's really, really common. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know how the workshop system produces that. There are a lot of the problems with this type of story. This is like the ultimate workshops book. But there are a lot of these kinds of stories where those apositive strings will just pop up, and I'm not sure how. There's a lot of really bad things about this type of story that you can trace back to really bad workshop advice. Like show don't tell is fine in an extremely limited manner. I've talked about that in previous episodes. But show don't tell leads to a lot of these really, really bad. Entirely personally, from a personal perspective. Anytime I say bad, I just mean I hate it. That's all I mean. I don't mean universally bad. Really bland, unoriginal sort of sentences. You could trace a lot of what happens there to basic advice like show don't tell. The real bland plotting of something like real life, you could trace that. The entirety of real life itself, you could trace that back to write what you know, which is the worst advice anyone could ever give a writer. Don't use your imagination. Imagination is bad. Just type what you have experienced in the blandest way possible. And people like that. Some people like that. I do not at all. So I wouldn't say it's universally bad. I'm just saying what happens with that type of advice is you get a very formulaic, very rigid sort of genre. It is the most rigid of all genres. It's explicitly anti-originality. The only type of originality it really produces is just the originality of your own life. So this person studied nematodes. That's the only original element. What was I saying? Bulverism. I was going to get to bulverism. Bulverism is such a delicious word. According to the workshop system, I should not enjoy strange, delicious words like bulverism, but I do. I'm not allowed to. I have to keep with plain. I was going to say positive strings. I won't spend too much time on it because it is entirely a pet peeve. But she was scared, frightened, terrified. Synonym. But there's nothing in the workshop system that that shouldn't really. It's a weird anomaly. I should say this as a scientist. a weird anomaly of the workshop system that so much of the bland, unoriginal prose will produce these appositive strings. And a lot of times it's punctuated with a period. But anyway, it's like she was afraid, period, scared, terrified that she would be caught. Trembling in her shoes, whatever. Yeah, so that just repeating synonyms. I can't call it a positive strings. It's not always a positive, but usually it's sort of structured like this: a positive at the end of a sentence marked off with a period. But the focus on efficiency really should eliminate a positive strings completely. Not that I care about efficiency. I just entirely personally hate a positive string. So Bulverism. I'm getting off on an entirely personal pet peeve. That's irrelevant. But Bulverism, I tried to find this as a fallacy, and I keep forgetting it, and I keep needing to remind myself of that word, because it is the perfect word. But what I was experiencing was, I would say, workshop system is bad. I would have all these different criticisms. I would say, workshop system produces bland, unoriginal, really rigid genre that also criticizes genre hypocritically or whatever. I would have all these different criticisms. So I'd say it's anti-originality, it's anti-experimental. So I have this whole list of criticism. So the response would be, well, you just don't like to be criticized, which is not even relevant. Not even relevant whatsoever. I have all these entirely genuine criticisms. I could say, show don't tell is harmful effects, right? What has harmful effects. All of these different supposed pieces of advice have these harmful effects that limit originality. Oh, you just don't like to be criticized. I don't care about being criticized. Somebody says, your story was bad for this reason. I won't care, because that person has a different opinion. That really highlights the basic structural problem with the workshop. Your opinion doesn't really equate to my problem in my story. But that's just the structure of the workshop itself. If I really hated Real Life by Brandon Taylor, but I wouldn't want Brandon Taylor to change it to please me. That would be a bad idea. Brandon Taylor should write exactly the book he wants, not the book I want. It's irrelevant what I want. So I think, whether or not you can take criticism is entirely irrelevant. So I kept trying to find what fallacy that was. I knew it was a fallacy. And for a while I thought it was affirming the consequent. I kept saying, oh, you're just affirming the consequent. And affirming the consequent basically means you've made up your mind already about the conclusion. You know what I mean? Yeah. Okay. You've made up your mind already about the conclusion, and so you make up all of these different reasons why the conclusion is true. Which, I talk a lot about post-rationalization, and I think that's sort of evolved in my mind from affirming the consequent to post-rationalization. And it is sort of like, Bulverism is sort of like that. It's related to it. It's very similar to it in the sense that if I say, I did not like Real Life by Brandon Taylor, my affirming the consequent would be something like, it is a bad book. It is a bad book because this, and this. Well, the reason I didn't like it is because I just didn't like it. And it's an entirely valid conclusion that doesn't need a reasoning for it. So affirming the consequent would be just filling in these blanks. Usually I call that post-rationalization. There's so many different post-rationalizations. It's one of the really relevant things to understanding your own responses to a piece. Is it a genuine response, or is it a post-rationalization? But Bulverism is very similar. C.S. Lewis coined the term. I'm not a big fan of C.S. Lewis. I do have C.S. Lewis books right here, just by coincidence. I have C.S. Lewis. I have the Space Trilogy, which I haven't read yet. My friend Lucas said that these were great. I don't really agree with a lot of what C.S. Lewis said, which is my hesitancy to actually read them. But I bought those because my friend Lucas said those were great. C.S. Lewis had a vivid imagination, but a lot of his philosophy I entirely disagree with. But he did coin the term Bulverism. But Bulverism basically means that you try to prove someone wrong with some irrelevant factor. And it's sort of like affirming the affirming, where you assume that the conclusion to the argument is that the other person is wrong. You just start with that basic belief. And commonly what you do is you look for some flaw in their character. So it's not exactly like, an ad hominem attack. It's if somebody gives you a math problem and you say your math problem is wrong because you didn't get enough sleep last night or something like that. you can't have a correct math problem because you're malnourished, whatever. It's something irrelevant. You want it to be wrong. You want the person to be wrong. So you come up with something just irrelevant about why the person is wrong. So if I say workshop system is bad and structurally flawed, you want that to be wrong. You're not necessarily attacking my character. You're not saying, you're ugly and stupid and you smell funny or what have you. That would be a hominem attack. It's sort of like the middle. There's so many fallacies that are sort of a mix of other fallacies. It's sort of like the middle ground fallacy between ad hominem and affirming the consequent. But that's basically what that response is based on. That's the fallacy that response is based on. If I have all of these entirely valid criticisms of the workshop system, whether or not I can take criticism has nothing to do with that whatsoever. You assume that psychologically I'm unable to handle this particular situation, therefore I must be I'm the one who must be affirming the consequent. I'm the one who must be post-rationalizing. And that's speaking of my friend Raluca, not to throw her under the bus, she's a wonderful person. But this relates to the Brandon Taylor book, because we saw a movie called The Edge of 17. There was a later movie called The Edge of 17 with Haley Steinfeld. This was a movie this was 1999. It was a very, very small independent movie. But it's about a kid coming out of the closet, getting his first boyfriend and what have you. And it was a really bad movie. I didn't like it at all. But Raluca said, "Oh, you just didn't like it because they were gay." She was just kind of picking on me, which is, like a humorous version of Bulverism. Just lighthearted version of that. But I pointed out right after, that doesn't bother me at all. I've been reading William S. Burroughs books for, since I was, I started reading them that year. That was 1999. Yeah. So I must have started reading them that year. I was like, I read William S. Burroughs books. And those don't bother me at all. Those are much, much more graphic and extreme. But I pointed out, there's one line in Edge of 17 where a guy says, "You would make the coolest boyfriend," which is just, not a great line. It's very cheesy. It's a very cheesy romantic movie. And I like cheesy romantic movies. I just didn't like this one. And so that has nothing really to do with liking it or disliking it. If you have a good, solid romantic movie, ultimately if you think of like the Haley Steinfeld version, I felt what she was feeling in that particular story. I really connected with her. It was a bit of a cheesy movie, but it was, our demographic difference is the fact that the Haley Steinfeld character in that movie was female and I'm male, and we were different ages. It has nothing to do with how much I could feel for her. Feel this empathetic experience. That's fairly relevant because the book I'm writing now is about a girl. It's about a teenager going on this and it's one of the most autobiographical stories I've ever written. I am opposed to write what you know. However, I do sometimes write what I know. It's not a universal condemnation of write what you know, but I would say treating write what you know as a universal is a problem. But I've gotten off track. But my point is, so if I say I did not like Brendan Taylor's real life, I thought that it personally, I felt like it was very bad. The response might be the Bulverism of saying, the reason you didn't like it is because of, you didn't relate to it on a demographic level. No, I mean, I've related to plenty of African American characters easily, just wonderful, wonderful African American characters in dozens and dozens of books. Most recently, I was on a Toni Morrison binge. So if you say you didn't relate to this character because he's Black, well, I must not have enjoyed all those Toni Morrison books that I enjoyed. I had a whole binge just in the last year, 2 years, what have you. So that's not an actual reason. That's just Bulverism. I didn't like it because I didn't like it. It's a post-rationalization. And thousands of gay characters. Saying that I don't relate to him for that reason is Bulverism. A great writer I can relate to a character regardless. I don't know if I ever talked about Simon and the Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. And I told Becky Albertalli, I mean, we happen to have the same name. I told Becky Albertalli, I got to meet her, and I told her that I relate very closely to Simon. He happens to have the same name, of course. We had some similar experiences in high school. So if you say, what do you really relate to? Do you relate to things where you had the experience, same experience as the person? Well, yeah, Simon from Simon versus Homo Sapiens Agenda had a lot of very similar sort of experiences. He's a lot more successful in his romantic experiences than I was. I had some really tragic romantic experiences. But I related really close to him, and she said, "Oh, you could." And I said, "I relate really close to him, except I just happen to be straight." It's, but a lot of the experiences are very, very similar. And he said, "Oh, you could be his straight soulmate," and I think that's what she wrote when she signed it. So yeah, to say, but if it was a really bad book, like I said, I don't really have elevated taste. That's a YA, it's a lighthearted YA book. It's not like sophisticated literature. I go from talking about Toni Morrison to this YA book. I did love this YA book. I did love Toni Morrison that I've been binging. But if I didn't like those books, probably the honest reason and an entirely valid reason that I like or dislike a book is just a rational subconscious response to explain that, to explain why I didn't like it. Could easily slip into Bulverism, could easily slip into affirming the consequent, or any other kind of post-rationalization. And I think that really clouds our understanding of what's actually happening. And to treat relatability as a universal good, especially demographic relatability as a universal good, highly problematic, has some problematic logical implications that are directly counterproductive to diversity. So instead of that, if I related directly to the experiences of Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda, I didn't have just as an example, I didn't have a lot of the same experiences. I had very, very few of the same experiences of the Woman Warrior. I related directly to, I connected to them. I didn't relate to them in terms of having the same experiences, but I connected to them. I felt what they were feeling. In both cases, the writer was very successful in making that empathetic connection. Why? Well, there's thousands of factors. Having the similar experience could make that easy. It doesn't mean it's good. It just means that connection is just a little easier. And that's much more of a practical way of thinking of things like relatability, connecting with your reader on the level of some sort of similar life experience. Thinking of it life experiences as universal is diluting, and I've talked about this before, where so often we treat that sort of life experience by treating it as a universal instead of the simpler, more accurate, more practical, and more effective concept of going from reader to writer, writer to reader, I should say, having that direct one-to-one circuitry. We say, as a writer, I'm transmitting this emotional experience to my reader, but first I have to go through all of humanity and all of history throughout universe and history and time. So treating experiences as universal experiences is counterproductive to, the purpose of emotional impact. I think that's about it. I might be to the end of my time. This lighting is really weird. I got a new lamp, and I got a new light bulb in my lamp, and I don't know why I look very ghostly. I should get some professional lighting one of these days. My pictures are falling down. My birdhead lady. I have a whole series of birdhead people, like Birdhead Father, which my son ripped in half. Birdhead Father, who's the star of a couple of my stories, which I used in multiple collages. My son just ripped him in half. There you go. I have a lot of these Birdhead characters. But there you go, Birdhead Father. I love Birdhead Father. I write about him all the time. I became obsessed with, I put this bird on this person's head. I became obsessed with him. I relate to him very directly. I do not have a bird head. Last I checked. I like this birdhead character. I relate to her very directly. This is upholstery man. I relate to him very directly. Very intensely. If you don't, I don't care. You could say, well, I didn't like your story because I didn't relate to characters because he had a bird head. I don't care. Don't relate to it. Don't like it. That doesn't matter to me. Anyway, I'm just rambling. I'll wrap it up. I'll see you on the next episode.